Stack Overflow is a website that is so ubiquitously used by programmers and software engineers that it'd be a disservice to you all if I didn't talk about it here. So I expect many of you have already stumbled across it yourself as you've looked for explanations to errors that you run into. I'll motivate this by explaining how software engineering and programming in general is super collaborative. The kinds of problems that we run into day to day are oftentimes, like right now, you're learning how to think like a programmer and how to do technical problem solving and how to break down a bigger problem into smaller pieces and write code that other people can read and all this different stuff. As you get out into the real world and you become a proficient programmer, a lot of your roadblocks become like practical implementation challenges. So there's two steps. One is you think about how do I solve this problem and you come up with a design. And the other half is thinking about now that I need to sit down and write my code, why is my code not working? And that's a very common issue. And so as an aside here, in my own work day to day at Google, I would spend, a lot of my time is spent actually coming up with design documents and having them reviewed, reviewing other people's design approaches, talking to other teams about how I can use their stuff in my code. And so I only end up spending maybe half my time, probably less than half of my time actually coding. Maybe 30% of my time is writing up designs and thinking through like algorithms that I can write or oftentimes structures that I can use in my code. And the other 25% is reviewing other people's code or meeting with other engineers, reading other people's design docs. But I say all this to then talk about that 50% of the time or 40%, however much I spend and different people spend on actually coding. A lot of the roadblocks there are how do I get code that actually works? And sometimes you look and you've been working all day and you've written 20 lines of code. I know you guys have experienced this in my class, especially early on. There are so many things that could trip you up. Other people have almost definitely run into the problem that you run into before. And so Stack Overflow is this site that's basically like Piazza, but it's public, and there are no official instructors. Everyone is just helping each other. And it's a great place to go and look for answers to questions that you might have. People sometimes joke, and they're only half joking. A large part of the job of a programmer is copy and pasting from Stack Overflow. Of course, as a joke, I don't do that much, and most software engineers and programmers aren't doing that all that much in their industry jobs. But yeah, when you work on a personal project, a lot of the issues you run into, you're going to look up online and you'll find an answer on Stack Overflow, and it'll explain how to fix it. So there's two main ways to use Stack Overflow. One is it's a huge repository of over the last, 10, 15 years, all of the issues that other people have run into. And so whenever you encounter an error message, you should go to Google and search it up, Google the error message. And very important here to know, being good at this, it takes a little bit of time to get used to the right way to Google your error messages. You want to make sure to take the parts that are related to the problem, which are often the name of the error, maybe it's a type error, and the description, like that says int is not subscriptable or something. But you don't want to include the line number, for example, or the actual snippet of code, like when you search, because those things are unique to you. Whereas the error message is what someone else would have posted had they run into that issue. And so it becomes a game of thinking about, hey, what terms should I search, or how should I structure my search to bring up the questions that other people have asked and the answers that other people have given. You'll want to try different search variations, include some additional information like the name of the language or the version of the language and the platform. Other tips, like look at all the answers and comments to a question, not just the top answer, and make sure that if you do copy code from an answer, you attribute that code by including a link to that answer as a comment in your code. And that's for two reasons. One, you should always give credit when you're using someone else's code or when you collaborate with other people. But two, later on, if you want to understand what that code is doing or, get more context, you might want to go back and look at that same question and answer, and having the link right there in the code will be really handy for that. So let me show you an example. If I come in here and I do something like this, turn second item, return item 1. So this will return the second thing in this I don't know, in this item. Maybe item isn't a great word. Let's say nums. Return the second number. So what will happen if I do, and I have a typo here, what happens if I do print return second and I pass in a string, Howard? Well, you run this and it will return O because that's the second letter in Howard. But now, what if instead of passing in Howard, I pass in the number 5403? Well, now I have this error. And so when I look at this error, I see type error, int object is not subscriptable. And it says return nums1. This is the file, the line number. So what do you Google here? If I take this whole traceback and I Google the whole thing, it doesn't return any results. Why? Because think about what someone else would have posted if they ran into this error. All of this stuff up here is unique to you. Your file is named main.py. Your code has line 6, and then your code has a function in line 3, and your code says return nums1. Other people would have a different variable or a different index that they're trying to get. The common thing that someone else would also have is this type error. And so that's just the thing you want to search. Type error, int object is not subscriptable. And look here, the second result is a Stack Overflow link. So if I pull up this Stack Overflow link, and I'll just make this a little bigger so it's easier for us to see. Whoops, just like this. This is a good question because it shows the error message and it shows a simple like snippet of code. As we scroll down here, one is you'll want to look at comments. That's my recommendation. Sometimes the comments have an answer and have some good advice. Like you might want to try this for splitting up a birthday. But let's scroll down here. The error is exactly what it says it is. You're trying to take sum all 0 when sum all is an int, and that doesn't make sense. All right, so this gives us an idea of what's wrong. Sometimes these answers can be a little snarky, and so don't get discouraged when you read that. But if you just keep looking, like for example, here's one. Here's a good explanation. The sum all variable is not yet a string. And so you're trying to index into an integer and you can't because you're doing it as if it was a string. So actually, if you wanted to make sure that the thing that you're indexing is a string, you could do num stir nums 1. And now if I run this, whoops, let me just come over here. Yeah, now this prints 4 nicely. Now, the other thing you can do on Stack Overflow is you can ask questions yourself. I'll say this is not super common because as you get good and you get experience at searching up errors, most people have run into the same issue you're running into, especially as a beginner. But at some point, you will either not be able to find that kind of question, same question that you're looking for, or an answer that works, or you might have some obscure issue. And so for that, you can ask your own question. Now, we've been very kind in this class because my job as your instructor is to help you learn and answer your questions. We've been answering questions on Piazza that aren't always the clearest, but I can sit down and figure out what they mean. But when you're out on the internet, when you're not in this class and you're not, paying the university to have an instructor who's there and answering your questions, you're relying on the goodwill of other people. And so you have to make sure that you ask your question in a very clear way for them. And there's this great post on Stack Overflow, how to ask a good question, that you should read before asking any questions. This post is fantastic, and I really wish kind of everyone could read this even before they start using Piazza. Because if you follow this, it greatly increases your chances of success. But a summary of what you need to make sure to do is, 1, you should include the minimum amount of code needed to reproduce the issue. So that means if you have a 200-line program and it's causing some error, don't just paste the whole 200-line program. Cut out get the snippet that's actually causing an error, simplify that segment of code to do something logically equivalent to what you were doing, and then share that snippet of code if it's still producing the error. Sometimes in the process of doing that, you'll find out what your error is on your own, and you won't even need to ask anymore. Then when you're writing the post, make sure that you come up with a clear title that makes sense. So not just Python error, but for example, subscription error when getting second element. And then in your post, explain what you've tried and what it didn't, and why it didn't work, and show that you've done the research and that you've tried the stuff. And so by showing that you've put effort in, by making a clear post, by including this minimal amount of code needed to reproduce the issue, you greatly increase the chances of a volunteer helping you.